Part 76. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 752. The Tang family has become a street rat recently, and everyone is shouting to beat them. The identity of Tang Huai's young master did not bring any honor to the Tang family. The prince's young master allowed his son to commit murders, and the prince's junior high school servants bullied others. Such news can win more attention. In fact, many dignitaries in Beijing are like this. For them, if they don't do something to oppress the people, it doesn't reflect their status as a powerful figure at all. The Tang family is just listed as a typical example. After all, some things have to be done. Everyone knows it in their hearts but won't say it with their mouths. But every day, negative news appears in newspapers and is spread word of mouth by people in Beijing. The meaning is different. Even if it's not a big deal, the Tang family won't suffer any big losses if the government pursues it, but it's a matter of face, although the Tang family doesn't have much face to begin with. After this incident, the Tang family could no longer hold their head high in front of other dignitaries and the people of the capital. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that this matter is unusual. There are so many unclean dignitaries in Beijing. The Ping'an County Government Office, the Jingzhou Government Office, and the Dali Temple Yushitai of the Ministry of Punishments have no reason to arrest anyone from the Tang family. In fact, even the people in Beijing knew what was going on. 20 years ago, the Tang family separated the third lady and a scholar and wanted to hunt down their less than 1-month-old son. 20 years later, the abandoned baby of the Tang family who survived the catastrophe transformed into the most noble dignitary of the Chen state and a close minister of the emperor. On the other hand, the Tang family had already declined. 30 years to Hedong, 30 years to Hexi. It only took the Tang family 20 years to travel from Hedong to Hexi. After doing such things back then, it is no wonder that Marquis Dingguo took revenge today. Within the Tang family, Tang Xiaoshen walked into the Tang mansion with 1 foot and 1 foot. After being called into the study, he looked up, raised a hand, and solemnly said, "Dad, Uncle, I swear, apart from these, I will never do anything else. What bad things have happened? Trust me." These days, he goes to 5 yamen every day, and his legs are almost broken because of these trivial things. He took a sip of tea, looked at Tang Huai and Tang Qi, and said, "Don't be angry, it's just a shame. It's not a big deal. As long as we lose our shame, they won't be able to attack us." Tang Qi glanced at him and didn't bother to scold him anymore. Although his words were a little ugly, they made sense. When you are a waste with no use value, others will no longer be able to use you. When you don't even have any face, others can't hurt you by damaging your face. The Tang family is now the latter. Anyway, they have lost all their face. Being visited several times a day by servants from various government offices can no longer make him angry because he is used to it. There was a cold look on his face, and he said, "Party struggle is not a filial son's house." He thinks that with this, he can completely overthrow the Tang family. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant of the Tang family walked in and whispered, "Sir, Song Qian from Jiangyi province is here to visit." Tang Qi frowned. Although many people had come to the Tang family in the past few days, most of them were servants from various government offices. Jiangyi province's visit to the Tang family to punish Song Qian was the same as the Dali Temple minister and the Minister of Punishment personally coming to the Tang family to hold him accountable. "That's too much," Tang Zhao said with an angry look on his face. "I have admitted everything I should admit, but I want to see what other charges they can accuse me of this time." When Song Tixing arrived in Jiangyi province, it was a bit inappropriate for the Tang family to have only one young head. Tang Qi and Tang Zhao walked out together, bowed their hands to a man who came towards them, and asked calmly, "I didn't know that Song Tixing came to Tang dynasty." "What's the matter?" Song Qian nodded and said, there is a case that requires the Tang family to cooperate with the investigation by the criminal division. Tang Qi glanced at Tang Zhao and asked with a calm expression, I wonder what kind of case it is that actually caused Song Tixing to come in person. Song Qian looked at him and said, 3 years ago, the Chu state envoy was assassinated in Lingzhou and the envoy was injured. His Majesty was furious and ordered the local government to investigate the case thoroughly. I wonder if Mr. Tang has taro? After Song Qian finished speaking, Tang Qi's expression changed slightly. The assassination of the Chu state envoy, the occupation of people's fields, and the connivance of his subordinates to commit crimes are completely different. There is nothing new in diplomacy. The current Tang family cannot bear the consequences of this case. So you're not looking for me? Tang Zhao breathed a sigh of relief. When he looked at Tang Qi, he said in surprise, Dad, what's wrong with you? Why are you looking so white? Song Qian looked at Tang Qi and continued, this case has been going on for too long. Mr. Tang may have forgotten it, but Song is deeply aware of it. When the assassination of the envoy occurred, Song was in Jingdong Road to raise the sentence, which happened to be responsible for investigating the case, but it took 3 years to find some clues. Tang Qi's expression returned to calmness and asked, I also have some taro in this case, but what does this have to do with my Tang family? Song Qiandao, the murderer who assassinated the envoy that day, had an arm chopped off by the envoy's guard. The punishment division found out that a housekeeper of the Tang family went out once at that time, and when he came back, he also had a broken arm. You are talking about Butler Han? Tang Qi glanced at him and said, this is just a coincidence. Butler Han was returning to his hometown to visit relatives. He encountered a strong enemy on the road and accidentally chopped off an arm. Mr. Song could not rely on. Doesn't this clue conclude that he is related to the assassination of the envoy? Of course not. Song Qian nodded and said, but we are waiting for the punishment officer and cannot let go of any clues. I would like to ask Mr. Tang to invite Butler Han out so that I can ask him clearly. If there is a misunderstanding, which can be regarded as clearing away the suspicion of being the housekeeper of your house. Tang Qi's expression did not change and he said, what a coincidence. Not long after Butler Han broke his arm, I gave him a severance package and asked him to go home for retirement. Master Song is looking for him, and I'm afraid he will kill him looking for it from my hometown. That's such an unfortunate coincidence. Song Qian swayed regretfully and continued to ask, may I ask Mr. Tang, is Butler Han's hometown at home? Tang Qi said, I only know that he is from Fengzhou, so I can only bother the criminal division to go to Fengzhou to find him. Song Qian asked, is there nothing else? Tang Qi shook his head and said, this is all I know. Fengzhou is a long way away. Looking for someone in the huge Fengzhou is like a needle. Song Qian sighed, cupped his hands and said, in that case, I will go back first. Tang Qi cupped his hands and said, Master Song, walk slowly. After Song Qian, the expression on his face calmed down, he strode into a certain courtyard, and said to the one-armed old man in the courtyard, you can't stay in the Tang family anymore, you must leave Beijing immediately. An hour later, a sedan left the Tang family's house, passed through the bustling crowd, and stopped at the door of a building in Beijing. As soon as the sedan stopped, several officers came out from the crowd and held the sedan together. Peng Chu opened the sedan curtain, and Tang Zhao looked at him with wide eyes. He got off the sedan, looked at the servants around him, and asked, what are you doing? Peng Kin glanced at the empty sedan and asked, where are you going, young master? Go to the brothel. Tang Zhao pointed forward and asked, what, is it illegal? No offense. Peng Kin glanced at him, looked at the differences behind him, and said, let's go. Inexplicable. Tang Zhao swayed and walked into the brothel. At the same time, a carriage that had passed by the sedan slowly drove out of the capital city gate. In the carriage, the one-armed old man looked gloomy. He left the capital today and would have to wait until King Duan ascended the throne and the Tang family rose again before he could return to the capital. He looked outside the carriage and urged the groom, "Hurry up." "Hush." Only a long sigh from the coachman was heard, and the carriage slowly stopped. The one-armed old man opened the car curtain and frowned. "What's going on?" He stopped abruptly before he finished speaking. He looked forward, his face turned pale, and there was cold sweat on his forehead. 3 feet away in front of the carriage, there was a person standing. The man was a middle-aged man with a butcher's knife on his waist. The middle-aged man looked at the one-armed old man, grinned, and said, "Long time no see. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 753. Party struggle is like fighting against landlords. No one will resort to Wangbang at the beginning. The conventional way of playing is to move first, and then wait until there are not many cards left in the hand, then blow up to determine the outcome. The Tang family hired assassins to assassinate the Chu state envoy, and it was Wang Jia who was in Tang Ning's hands. The Tang family actually wanted to assassinate him back then. Lanlan just suffered an unreasonable disaster, but the government would not care so much. 3 years ago, this case had been classified as an assassination of the Chu state mission and a destruction of peace between the two countries. In the past, the Tang family might have been able to resist the crime of assassinating a friendly envoy at the cost of breaking their muscles and bones, but this time was different from the past. This crime was enough to overthrow the current Tang family. Tang Ning was reading in the study when Qing trotted in and informed him that Marquis Wu Lai was visiting. Tang Ning asked Qing to make the best tea. After Wu Lihao sat down, he asked with a smile, "Are we going to start?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "It's time to start." Wu Lihao rubbed his palms and asked, "Do you need my help?" In fact, the assassination of the envoy is just one of them. The death of Han Chang, the son of Wu Lihao, can also be traced to the Tang family. But the bargaining chips in the case of the assassination of the envoy were enough. If Han Chang's case was added to the case, it would undoubtedly be more difficult for the Tang family to turn over, but Wu Lihao himself would not end well because of Tang Jing's case. Tang Ning smiled and said, "No need, Lord Marquis will just watch." "Then I'll just watch." Wu Lihao stood up without drinking tea, limped out, and said with a smile, "Although my legs and feet are not strong enough, my eyes can still see clearly." Wu Lihao walked out of the Tang family, and the other Tang family was shrouded in dark clouds. Tang Zhao looked at Tang Qi, shook his head and said, "Uncle Han was arrested. I saw with my own eyes that he was sent to the Yamen of the Ministry of Justice." Tang Qi's eyelids jumped wildly, and he said calmly, "Steward Han will not admit it. The Ministry of Punishment has insufficient evidence. It is impossible to identify him as the murderer of the mission just because he broke an arm." "It's useless." Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Punishment has published several books. The resolution of wrongs used this case as an example to emphasize the importance of preserving evidence. The murderer who assassinated the envoy back then, that arm was remade out of clay by a skilled craftsman. Just take it out and compare it to know whether it belongs to Han Bo." The case is also described in detail in Case Investigation and My Years as the Minister of the Ministry of Justice. After he finished speaking, he looked at Tang Qi in surprise and asked, "Dad, have you never read the books in your study?" The books in the study were bought by servants as a pretense. He had not even looked through them. Tang Qi felt sullen and whispered, "No." Tang Zhao murmured in a low voice, "Then you still force me to watch." Tang Qi frowned and said, "What did you say?" Tang Zhao immediately said, "I say, Tang Ning has pushed our Tang family to this point. If we don't think of a way, the Tang family will be doomed." Tang Qi took a deep breath, a stern look appeared on his face, and said, "Uncle Han can't stay." Tang Zhao glanced at him and said, "It's useless even if he's dead. The Ministry of Punishment has physical evidence. Even if he's dead, you can still tell that the arm is his. He can still shift the focus if he's alive. If he's dead, it all depends on what the Ministry of Punishment says." Tang Hui walked in from outside, looked at him, and said, "Then what do you think the Tang family should do now?" Tang Zhao thought for a while and said, "We must find someone to send a message to Uncle Han." "How easy is it to go to the Ministry of Punishment and send a message?" Tang Qi glanced at him and asked, "Do you think the Tang family is still the same as it was 3 years ago?" When the power of the Tang family was at its peak, none of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries had supporters. Let alone spreading a message, even asking the Ministry of Punishment to release someone was just a matter of 1 sentence. But now, they can't even send a message. Arrive. Alas. Tang Zhao sighed, looked at the 2 of them, and said, "Look, what have you done to the good Tang family?" "Shut up," Tang Qi glared at him and said, "Get to the point. The king of hell is easy to see, but the kid is difficult to deal with." Tang Zhao looked at him and said, "It's just a message, it's not something difficult. Why go to the king of hell? Doesn't the kid have a mouth?" Capital North District. The capital is the capital of Chen State. It is prosperous and prosperous. More than half of Chen State's dignitaries gather here. However, no matter how glamorous things are, there is a dark side. In the capital, most officials and dignitaries live in the southeast, wealthy businessmen generally gather in the west district, and the north district of the capital is populated by people of lower status. There are prostitutes everywhere here, thieves are everywhere, and no one with any status is willing to appear here. Xiao Gui is a jailer in the Ministry of Punishment. He works in the Ministry of Punishment, which is one of the 6 ministries in charge of law, punishment, and prison. People and officials are frightened by this, but not all people who work in the Ministry of Punishment are honorable. Xiao Gui's father is a jailer, his grandfather is a jailer, and his great-grandfather is also a jailer. If there is no accident, his just-born son, who is only 1 month old, will also be a jailer in the future. In the Ministry of Punishment, Lord Shangshu is a powerful figure in the court, and the ministers all receive national salaries, and even the monthly salaries of the police officers are not low. Only the jailer, as the lowest-ranking police officer in the Ministry of Punishments, does the most painful and tiring job and gets the least amount of money. The prison is different from the prisons in other places. Those who can be locked up here are not ordinary people before entering. Even if they enter because of a crime, the guards must treat them carefully. Xiao Gui had just emptied the buckets for the prisoners in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. He dragged his tired body down the street, thinking that he would buy his wife some cakes she liked when the Ministry of Justice gave him money tomorrow. It was time to renew the medicine that my mother had stopped taking for half a month. After buying these, there should be a few dozen coins left. He had to save them. If there was any emergency at home, he would be able to deal with it at that time. He lowered his head and thought about these things. He bumped into someone unexpectedly. When he raised his head, he saw that the other person was dressed in luxurious clothes and had an extraordinary temperament. He was shocked and said hurriedly, "Sir, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." "Is it enough to just say sorry for bumping into me?" The young man had the usual face of a playboy in the capital. He looked at Xiao Gui with disdain, pointed to an alley on the street, waved to the followers behind him, and said, "Take him to the alley over there. I will teach him a lesson today." Xiao Gui's face changed drastically, and he said in panic, "Sir, I didn't mean it." But the noble young man would never listen to him. As soon as Xiao Gui opened his mouth, he was carried by 2 followers and walked towards the dark alley. "Sir, don't. Stop it, stop it. Someone, help me." Seeing that the man was dragged into the alley by the noble young man's followers, the people on the street took a look and left one after another. Those who can bring so many followers when going out are people they can't afford to offend. They can only blame the poor man for being careless. In the dark alley, Xiao Gui knelt on the ground and cried, "Sir, please forgive me. I have an 80-year-old mother and a 3-year-old child. The noble young man looked at him and said, "Don't pretend. Your mother just turned 50 this year, and your son is only a month old. Where did you get an 80-year-old mother and a 3-year-old child?" I didn't expect that this noble young man knew his family's situation so well. Xiao Gui was stunned and stopped crying. The noble young man looked at him and said, "I need your help with something." The person in front of him was obviously of an extraordinary status. How could he, a small jailer, help with something? Even if there was something, it would probably be a big deal. Xiao Gui's face turned pale and he kowtowed like pounding garlic, saying, "Sir, I have old people and children. Please raise your hand, please." Bang! Suddenly, there was a sound of a heavy object falling to the ground. Xiao Gui raised his head and saw a silver ingot in front of him. This silver ingot was very big. It was the largest silver ingot Xiao Gui had ever seen. It was also a 50 liang ingot stipulated by the state of Chen. As a jailer, he had to go without food and drink for 10 years to save up the 50 liang of silver. Xiao Gui raised his head and asked, "Please tell me, sir, what do you need me to do?" The noble sir smiled and said, "It's nothing big. I just want you to help pass on a message." It was not an easy task to pass on a message to the prisoner in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. It required great risks. Thinking of his son who was not even a month old, Xiao Gui showed hesitation on his face. Bang! Another silver ingot was thrown on the ground, exactly the same size as before. Xiao Gui picked up 2 silver ingots, put them in his arms, got up from the ground, and asked, "Sir, what message do you need me to take?" "To whom? When?" The young man said, "The prison of the Ministry of Justice, a man with only one arm, the sooner the better." Xiao Gui raised his head and said, "I remember that the Ministry of Justice seemed to have arrested a man with a broken arm yesterday." The young man looked at him and said, "Listen carefully to what I say next." After a while, the young man looked at him and asked, "Do you remember everything?" Xiao Gui nodded and said, "I remember everything." "That's good." The young man looked at him for the last time and said, "I'm leaving." "Sir, please stay." Xiao Gui stopped him in time and said, "If you leave like this, people outside may be suspicious." The nobleman looked at him and asked, "What do you mean?" "Please beat me up, sir." Xiao Gui pointed to his face, grinned, and said, "Wait here." You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 754. Chapter 749 of the main text volume of Ruyi Little Man. There are rumors that there are many powerful people in the capital, and there are often rumors that a certain family is bullying others. It is not the powerful people themselves, but the playboys in the family. The person who just dragged someone into a dark alley and beat him up just because he was hit on the street was Tang Zhao, the former second son of the Tang family and now the young head of the Tang family. Even though the Tang family is now in decline and is in trouble, there is still no problem in bullying some ordinary people. Not long after, Tang Zhao walked out of the alley. As soon as he walked to the street, several policemen came up. Tang Zhao looked at them and said helplessly, "Are you tired of following me all day long?" The policeman said, "Unfortunately, I saw the young master oppressing the people. Please come with us." "Let's go, let's go." Tang Zhao said impatiently, "It's just a small fine again, but the tea in your Ping'an County government is pretty good. Remember to make me a cup later." The policeman ignored Tang Zhao and looked at Xiao Gui, who was walking out with a bruised nose and swollen face, and said, "Please come with us to the county government office." "No, no, no." Xiao Gui glanced at Tang Zhao, with a look of fear on his face, and said, "I'm fine, I just accidentally fell down in the alley, it's none of this young master's business. Tang Zhao looked at the catcher, twitched the corner of his mouth, looking like a playboy, and said, "You see, people say it's none of my business." The policeman looked at Xiao Gui and said, "Don't be afraid. When you get to the county government office, the county magistrate will make the decision for you. It's really none of this young master's business. I still have something to do. I'm leaving first." Xiao Gui seemed to be worried about Tang Zhao's revenge, so he limped away without waiting for the catcher to speak again. Tang Zhao looked at the policeman from Ping'an County government and asked, "How about it? Do you still want to go to the county government?" The people who were beaten obviously did not want to offend Tang Zhao. If he took Tang Zhao back to the county government office forcibly, it would not comply with the case handling procedures at all, and he would probably be caught. The catcher's thoughts changed rapidly, and he finally bowed his hand to Tang Zhao and said, "Excuse me." Xiao Gui walked through 2 streets before reaching the north district of the capital. After passing through several more small alleys, we finally came to a dilapidated courtyard. A woman was holding an infant baby in her arms. Seeing that he was limping and with a bruised nose and face, she hurriedly ran forward and said anxiously, "Master, what's wrong with you? You got into a fight." Mother said, "Don't fight, and fight outside." Xiao Gui pulled her into the courtyard, closed the door, and whispered, "Come into the room and talk." The woman entered the room, put down the child, took Xiao Gui's hand, and asked, "What happened?" Xiao Gui took out 2 large silver ingots from his arms, handed them to her, and said, "Put this money away." Looking at the 250 taels of silver ingots that Xiao Gui took out, the woman suddenly became panicked and said in a trembling voice, "Master, where did you steal the silver? Please return it to others as soon as possible. You were caught stealing so much silver. If you stop, your hands and feet will be broken." "It's not stolen." Xiao Gui grinned and said, "Today someone spent 100 taels of silver to buy a word from me. I never thought that the words coming out of my mouth, Xiao Gui, would be so valuable." The woman's face turned pale and she said, "Master, you are out of your mind. Don't you know what you do? We can't accept this money. Please return it to me as soon as possible." Xiao Gui smiled and said, "Once you accept this money, you can't return it." The woman looked even more anxious, the head of the house. Xiao Gui stretched out his hand to stop her from continuing. His expression became serious. He looked at her and said, "You have to remember clearly what I'm going to say next. If I'm fine, of course it's best. These 100 taels of silver, you exchange it into pieces of silver twice, and wear a cloak when there are many people on the street. Don't let anyone know that Fu'er can't be a jailer in the future. You spend some money to let him learn a craft. Don't be as useless as me." The woman wiped her tears and choked with sobs, "Head of the household, without you, how can we 2 survive? Don't worry, I won't die. At most, I will be exiled to the army for a few years and come back. We are from the Ministry of Punishment and know these things very well." Xiao Gui squeezed out a smile on his face and said, "With these 100 taels of silver, we can do more things than I can do. A lot more. I can't do without money." He wiped his nose and continued, "Also, when you get rich in the future, remember not to stop my mother's medicine, and buy you a set of beautiful clothes and jewelry. You have been with me for so many years, and you don't even have a decent piece of jewelry. No, it's hard on you." The woman threw herself into his arms and cried, "You are the one who suffers." Tang Ning sat in the study and looked at the letter in her hand. His people are watching the 4 entrances of the Tang family day and night. When the Tang family goes out, where they go, and what they do, they will be recorded and sent here every night. Tang Hui and Tang Qi did not go out today. Tang Zhao went to the bookstore and bought a lot of books. He was hit by a commoner on the road and ordered his men to drag him and beat him. Peng Chen stood beside him and asked, "Sir, Do you want the Ping'an County government to go to the Tang mansion to summon Tang Zhao again for bullying the people? No need. Tang Ning waved her hand. The Tang family's affairs were progressing step by step. At this point, there was no need to use the same methods at the beginning. He thought of the previous messages and asked, Tang Zhao likes to buy books these days. It started a few months ago, Peng Chen said strangely. He often goes to the bookstore to buy books. Several times, he stayed in the bookstore all day reading. He was extremely absorbed. It didn't look like he was pretending. There hasn't been any trouble in the past few months. In the past, Tang Zhao was just the second-generation ancestor of the Tang family. He ate, drank, whored, gambled, and oppressed the people. This was what the second-generation ancestor should do. After Tang Jing's death, he became the young head of the Tang family and the only heir, so his behavior would naturally undergo some changes. Tang Ning didn't know whether he really found the joy of life from the book, or whether he was writing it for others to see, but no matter which reason it was, it couldn't explain why he suddenly turned into a lawless dandy. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, has there been any investigation into the person who was beaten today? Peng Chen nodded and said, although he did not dare to go to the county government, considering that he might be useful in the future, the police from Ping'an County secretly followed him and found his residence. Tang Ning put down the letter in her hand and said, check him again. Department of Punishment, Tian Lao. Among the yamen, the jailers have the lowest status, and among the jailers work the hardest, do the dirtiest and most tiring work, and have the lowest status. In the prison of the Ministry of Punishments, the prisoners are not ordinary people. The guards cannot treat them as prisoners and must accompany them and be careful everywhere. The situation in the court is changing, and factions are constantly fighting. Today's prisoners may be able to stand up and step into the court again tomorrow. In the past, there were jailers who made things difficult for the prisoners in the prison, but not long after, the prisoners' party was in the court. Gaining power, he was rescued from prison. Within 2 days, there was one less jailer in the penal prison. There are countless precedents, so it has become a habit of the jailers of the Ministry of Punishment to be careful with the prisoners in the prison. Although the jailer has a low status, he has a lot of free time every day compared to the police. In the 3-acre land of Tian Lao, he plays cards and throws a few dice every day, and no one cares about it at all. Several jailers were sitting at the table in the front, gambling in full swing. The servant from the dining hall brought a few wooden barrels and said, meal is here. A jailer was lucky enough to wave his hand and said, leave it alone, I'll be there in a minute. Xiao Gui picked up a bucket and said with a smile, I happen to be going to deliver food, why don't I deliver it to you too? That's a good relationship. The jailer patted Xiao Gui's chest and said, I'll buy you a drink after winning money. Xiao Gui smiled, carried the bucket, and walked deeper into the cell. He delivered meals to the prisoners along the way and came to a cell in the deepest part. There was a one-armed old man imprisoned in the cell. He was sitting cross-legged on the ground and taking a nap with his eyes closed. Xiao Gui finished the meal, squatted on the ground, passed it through a small hole, and said in a low voice, I'll bite you to death because you went to assassinate the Tang family's scoundrels. You don't know about the envoy. In the cell, the one-armed old man's eyes suddenly opened. Xiao Gui didn't look at him again. After delivering the meal, he picked up the empty bucket and walked back along the original road. When he walked back, the jailers at the front of the Sky prison no longer gambled on the sieve. They all knelt on the ground and looked at the person in front of them fearfully. Song Yi, the Minister of Punishment, had a cold expression on his face. He didn't look at them, but at Xiao Gui. Bang! The empty bucket in Xiao Gui's hand fell to the ground and slowly rolled to Song Yi's feet. Rong Xiao Rong says. I took a nap in the afternoon and woke up at 8 o'clock. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 755. Tang Ning held a letter in her hand sent by Song Yi, Minister of the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Punishment has confirmed that a jailer named Xiao Gui in the Tianya prison had contact with the one-armed housekeeper of the Tang mansion, and that jailer was the one who had a conflict with Tang Zhaokai on the street. The Tang family obviously had something to say to the man in prison, but under the strict protection of the Ministry of Punishment, no one was allowed to visit him, so the message could only be conveyed in this way. An officer from the criminal department came over. He looked up at Tang Ning and asked cautiously, "Master Tang, Master Shangshu asked me to ask you if you want Xiao Gui to confront the Tang family." Tang Ning smiled and said, "No, let's see what they want to do first." He also wants to see what other options the Tang family has. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Although no matter what they do, the result is destined, but they might as well give them some hope first, and in the end, they will have greater success. Gap. After hearing this, the head of the criminal department nodded and said, "Then I will resign first." The head of the criminal department had just left for less than a quarter of an hour when Xiao Ju strode in from outside and said dissatisfied, "You didn't tell me such a big thing. You are so uninterested." Tang Ning had not seen Xiao Ju much since her wedding. She probably had to wait for Lu Ya at home and had no free time. He glanced at Xiao Ju and said, "What's the use of telling you? Don't look down on others." Xiao Ju patted the table and reminded, "Don't forget that I am also General Zhou Xiaoei." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Do you really want to help me?" Xiao Ju twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "That's still false. I, Mr. Xiao, have always been willing to go out of his way to protect my friends." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "How about you bring 500 guards, crush the Tang family, and bring the heads of Tang Huai and Tang Qi to me?" Xiao Ju looked at him, thought for a moment, and asked, "Lu Ya likes to eat sour food these days. Do you think she will have a son in the future?" Lu Ya's stomach has obviously begun to perk up. Xiao Ju brought her to Tang's house today to relieve her boredom. It happened that Xiao Ru Xiaoai and Tang Yao Yao were at home, and the weather was good. Qing'er had someone set up a table in the inner courtyard, and the four of them gathered around to play mahjong for fun. Tang Ning and Xiao Ju were sitting in the pavilion in the outer courtyard, separated from the inner courtyard by a moon gate. Xiao Ju looked at him and asked, "If you do this, you won't be afraid of offending His Majesty? You must know that what your Majesty dislikes the most is when the same parties oppose different parties and fight within the court." Tang Ning said calmly, "Then let's try and see if His Majesty will get angry." In fact, this attack on the Tang family was also his test of Chen Huang. He wanted to see where Chen Huang's bottom line was and what kind of mentality he had towards the Tang family. Seeing his indifferent expression, Xiao Ju waved and said, "You have your own ideas. If you need my help, if you need anything, just let me know." "There is one thing," Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "You and your wife should try to come to my house as little as possible these days." "Why, are you afraid that Lu Ya will irritate your wife?" Xiao Ju looked at Tang Ning, finally straightened his spine and said, "At first, you said I couldn't do it, but now look, who can't do it?" "Let's not talk about this anymore." Tang Ning waved her hand and asked casually, "Have you been holding it back these days?" Xiao Ju had lived for nearly 20 years before he realized what it was like to be a real man. It was easy for him to lose control of himself. Lu Ya was also the type of strong woman. The two of them stirred up the fire of heaven and earth, making it even more difficult to control themselves. Their wedding date was brought forward. This is the best proof. Now that Lu Ya is pregnant, even if he does it by himself on weekdays, he still feels a little worse after all. Tang Ning's words touched Xiao Ju's sore spot. She sighed and said, "Speaking of this, I really envy you. You have so many wives." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "You can do it too." "Me?" Xiao Ju shook his head mockingly and said, "We are different." Tang Ning asked, "Don't you want to?" Xiao Ju sighed and said, She won't let me. Tang Ning waved her hand and asked, just tell me whether you want it or not. I think. Xiaoju thought for a moment and finally nodded sincerely. Tang Ning smiled, looked at him, and asked, have you discovered something? Xiaoju asked in surprise, what's the matter? Tang Ning pointed to the inner courtyard separated by a wall, lowered her voice and said in a voice that only Xiaoju could hear, there has been no sound of playing cards from the other side of the wall for a long time. When Xiaoju heard this, his body trembled and his face turned pale. He walked gently to the base of the wall, stepped on the stones, and looked over, just in time to meet Lu Ya's burning eyes. Lu Ya looked at him, gritted her teeth and said, do you want to die? Fang family. In recent days, Tang Ning has launched an attack on the Tang family, and many of his allies are secretly gathering strength to gradually drag the Tang family into this huge quagmire from which they cannot escape. The downfall of the Tang family was not only of great significance to Tang Ning, but also of greater significance to the Fang family. With the fall of the Tang family, King Duan lost his last source of support, which was undoubtedly a happy sight for the Fang family, who wanted to help King Run seize the throne. Fang Hong was writing a book in the study. Fang Zhe walked in and walked to the table. After looking at it, he shook his head and said, it's too early to overthrow the Tang family. This book won't have much effect. Fang Zhe put down his pen, looked at him, and said in surprise, the Ministry of Punishment has compared the evidence preserved a few years ago and confirmed that the murderer who assassinated the Chu delegation was undoubtedly the housekeeper of the Tang dynasty. The murderer who assassinated the friendly delegation isn't the crime of treason enough to overthrow the Tang family. If the butler of the Tang dynasty died without any evidence, it would be fine. Fang Zhe shook his head and said, but he is obviously not that stupid. In the case at that time, not only the Chu state envoy was assassinated, but also a young man who was just a young man was assassinated. As long as Tang Ning insists that he does not know about the mission and his purpose is only Tang Ning, the Tang family's treason charges will not be implemented. In fact, they really should not know about the mission. He looked at Fang Hong and said, the former is a serious crime of treason and rebellion, and the latter is a family matter of the Tang family. Of course, the crime of assassinating Ling Zhuozhi is not a light crime, but I am afraid it is far from the goal of completely overthrowing the Tang family's situation. Fang Zhe explained it very clearly, and Fang Hong understood everything. The outcome of the Tang family depends on how the Ministry of Punishment convicts the case. This case has attracted a lot of attention in Beijing. Every step of the Ministry of Punishment's handling of the case must comply with the rules. If the Tang family kills the ignorant envoy, the Ministry of Punishment will not. This case can be characterized as treason and rebellion. Fang Hong looked at him and said, but what Mr. Tang wants is not this result. Fang Zhe raised his head and said, to completely overthrow the Tang family, what is needed is a heavy blow. Unless the Chu state comes forward, the Tang family will not fall so quickly. The key to this case lies in whether the Tang family intentionally assassinated the Chu envoy. It will not be easy for the Ministry of Punishments to implement this crime against the Tang family. But if the state of Chu wants an explanation from the state of Chen in the name of the country, regardless of the purpose of the Tang family, the fact that the envoy of the state of Chu was indeed assassinated in the state of Chen is enough to prevent the Tang family from turning over. Fang Hong sighed lightly and said, although there are envoys from the Chu state in the capital, this case is obviously a civil strife in the Chen state. How could they easily intervene? Fang Zhe smiled and said, that's not necessarily the case. Rong Xiaorong says. Daily sacrifice. I am a crazy primitive tribe adventure, farming, war articles. No practice, no system, just ordinary people. Ruyi Xiaolang Jun only represents the views of the author Rong Xiaorong. If its content is found to be in violation of national laws, please delete it. Our position is only committed to providing a healthy and green reading platform. Thank you all. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 756. A major event that happened in the capital recently was known as the controversy between the two Tang dynasties. The new dignitaries who have been waiting for their revenge for many years and the old wealthy families who were once powerful but gradually declined. Any commoner in the capital can talk about their grievances for an hour. The reincarnation of heaven brings unfavorable retribution. The wrong choice made by the Tang family in the capital 20 years ago led to the overthrow of the family today. 3 years ago, the assassination of the Chu envoy was the last straw that broke the Tang family's back. Although the Tang family denied murdering the envoy, they admitted that they sent people to assassinate the then Dingguo Marquis and only accidentally injured the envoy. Assassinating envoys and assassinating family blood are two completely different crimes. Admitting to murdering the envoy was equivalent to admitting to treason and rebellion. Although the assassination of Dingguo Ho was also a serious crime, it was half a family matter of the Tang family and would not have a devastating impact on the Tang family. As for how to judge this case, it depends more on His Majesty. These days, the palace has been very quiet. His Majesty claimed to be ill and has not been in court for several days. However, it is said that the letter from the Ministry of Punishment has been handed over, and the results should be available soon. In the palace, concubine Tang Hui stood at the door of a certain palace, with a sullen look on her face, and said, "I want to see your Majesty." Wei Jian stopped in front of her and said, "Mother, your Majesty is not feeling well. He just took a rest. If you have anything else, we can talk about it after your Majesty gets better." Concubine Tang Hui said angrily, "Slave dog, I have something urgent to do with your Majesty. How dare you stop me?" Wei Jian said, "Go back to your Majesty, your Majesty said you won't see anyone. Please don't embarrass your servants." Concubine Tang Hui said angrily, "You bastard, can't I care about your Majesty's health?" Wei Jian's expression remained unchanged and he said, "I dare not disobey His Majesty's order. Please ask your Majesty to return to the palace. Don't wait until your Majesty blames you." You. Concubine Tang Hui and several eunuchs were arguing at the palace gate. At a certain moment, a voice suddenly came from inside the palace. "Let her in." Hearing Emperor Chen's voice, Wei Jian took a step back, opened the door of the palace, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, please." Concubine Tang Hui strode in. Wei Jian closed the palace door again and stood at the door, his expression calm again. In the main hall, Chen Huang stood in the hall, with a rosy complexion and a tall body. He did not look like he was bedridden as rumored by the outside world. Emperor Chen turned his back to concubine Tang Hui, stood with his hands behind his back, and asked, "What do you want from me?" Concubine Tang Hui stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if you don't care anymore, the court will be disrupted by people with ulterior motives." Chen Huang turned around and asked, "Where are the people with ulterior motives?" Tang Huifei said, "Some people form cliques for personal gain. They unite with several high-ranking officials in the DPRK to create party disputes and persecute good ministers. Forging cliques for personal gain, and fighting against those who are different." Huang Chen glanced at her and said, "What a big hat. Are you talking about Tang Ning?" Concubine Tang Hui said angrily, "Your Majesty, you can think about it." He traveled to 6 departments, and every time he went to one, he would clear out the people of the Tang family. Isn't that what the party is about? Members of the Tang family, Emperor Chen looked at her and asked, "When did all the 6 departments belong to the Tang family? Isn't it possible that the imperial court's surname is Tang?" Concubine Tang Hui's face turned pale. She knew she had made a mistake and immediately said, "I didn't mean this." "I know very well whether you mean this or not." Huang Chen glanced at her and said, "In recent years, your Tang family has relied on its power to control the court, and has secretly done so many things to deceive superiors and conceal their subordinates. You think I know?" Tang Huifei's face turned a little pale. She came here to complain, but she didn't expect that before she said a few words, the situation had completely reversed. At this moment, she was at a loss and whispered, "Your Majesty." Emperor Chen didn't look at her and asked, "Do you know why I asked him to walk in the 6 divisions back then?" Concubine Tang Hui lowered her head and said, "I don't know." Chen Huang looked at her and said, "Because I want to use him to balance the Tang family, but I didn't expect that his obsession with revenge is so deep in his heart. You, the Tang family, are no match for him." Tang Huifei's palms were sweating. She had never thought that everything Tang Ning did during her 6-month tour was secretly approved by His Majesty. It turned out that he had been dissatisfied with the Tang family for a long time. Chen Wang's voice gradually increased, "The Tang family has ambitions and the ambition to run the royal family, and you, since you walked out of that door, have become a member of the royal family. When King Duan comes to power in the future, you want to be a puppet held hostage by the Tang family. Or an emperor who is not controlled by his relatives and can single-handedly control the court." Concubine Tang Hui turned pale, bit her lip, lowered her head and said, I understand." Chen Huang waved his hand and said, "Go down if you understand." Concubine Tang Hui was blessed, turned around and walked out of the hall, walked a few steps, stopped again, turned around and said, "I don't dare to discuss state affairs. I just hope that your Majesty can take care of the Tang family for my sake, a way to survive." Emperor Chen didn't hesitate for long before he said, "I promise you." When concubine Tang Hui walked out of the hall, her steps staggered a little. Today's conversation in the hall subverted some of her perceptions and changed some of her long-held thoughts. Between her family and her son, she didn't need to think about it, and she knew which side she should be on. Things in the Tang family have been aroused recently, and the emperor's measures against the Tang family have finally come to fruition. 3 years ago, the steward of the Tang mansion was instructed by Tang Qi to murder a candidate from Lingzhou, which was unacceptable by law. His Majesty ordered the Ministry of Personnel to immediately remove Tang Qi from the position of Imperial College Jeju and confine him at home, awaiting further punishment. The steward of the Tang mansion, who committed murder and injured people and implicated the envoy, was sentenced to immediate execution and executed 3 days later. His Majesty's way of handling the matter was not beyond everyone's expectations. 3 years ago, although the case of the assassination of the envoy caused a lot of uproar, it did not actually lead to any serious consequences. At that time, Ding Guoho was just a small candidate and had an unclear relationship with the Tang family. His Majesty could not have wanted Tang Qi's head because of this case. In the whole case, the steward of the Tang mansion naturally took the biggest blame. As for Tang Qi, the position of Imperial College Jeju was of no use to the Tang family, so it was gone. When Prince Duan took the throne, Tang Qi would be able to enter the court again. In general, this case had a great impact, but in the end, His Majesty still took it lightly. The Tang family did not suffer too much loss, but took the opportunity to lose the biggest handle. Inside the Tang mansion, Tang Qi breathed a sigh of relief. Although he lost his position as the Imperial College Master, the Tang family was still there. There was still a prince's tutor in the family, and there was still a chance to make a comeback. The case 3 years ago was settled, and Tang Ning no longer had any handle on the Tang family. For them, it was not a bad thing. He shook his head, with a look of regret on his face, and said, "The Tang family's troubles are finally over, but it's a pity for Han Guangjia. Don't be happy too early." Tang Zhao showed a thoughtful look on his face and said, "I always feel that he won't let it go so easily." In the capital, a street far away from the main street, Tang Ning walked into a tea house on the street, and a waiter came up to him and asked with a smile, "What would you like to drink, sir?" Tang Ning looked around. There were no guests in the tea house, only a shopkeeper and a waiter. He retracted his gaze and said, 2 taels of braised beef and a jar of girl's red wine." The waiter smiled awkwardly and said, "Sir, this is a tea house. We don't sell braised beef or girls' red wine." The tea house owner came out, glared at him, and said, "We will try our best to meet your request. Take a few coins and go to the main street to buy 2 tails of braised beef and a jar of the best girls' red wine." Although the waiter was surprised, he dared not disobey the owner's order, so he nodded and said, "Sir, wait a moment, I'll be back soon." After the waiter ran out of the tea house, the owner closed the door and turned around, looking at Tang Ning, bowed and said respectfully, "Lu Wei, the chief of the investigation department, greets the envoy. I wonder what the envoy has to say." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 757. The Detective Department of Chu State is equivalent to the Secret Intelligence Department of Chen State, and its main task is espionage work. In addition to the permanent envoys stationed in the capital, the Chu State also installed an intelligence department in the Chen State's capital. Of course, these were carried out secretly and were not known to the Chen State officials. There are only permanent interests between countries, but no permanent friends. No country would trust its back to another country. Tang Ning believed that Emperor Chen's secret espionage department must have a branch in Kyoto, Chu State. The plan to deal with the Tang family was made when Tang Ning was on the grassland. Therefore, he communicated with Li Tianlan in advance so that he could borrow the power of Chu State at any time. Tang Ning took out a token from her arms, waved it in front of the shopkeeper's eyes, then took it back and said, "I need you to do something for me." Seeing the token, the shopkeeper's face became more respectful, and he bowed and said, "Your Majesty, please give me your instructions." A quarter of an hour later, Tang Ning walked out of the tea house, and the waiter walked towards her, carrying a paper bag and a wine jar, and said in surprise, "Sir, your wine and the meat you want." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "No more." "Hey." The waiter was about to call him, when the tea house owner came out and said, "Stop shouting, you can keep the meat for yourself. I have to go out, you watch the shop." "Eat it yourself." The waiter was startled when he heard this, and then he happily squeezed the quick sauce beef and put it into his mouth. He uncorked the wine and took a sip happily before the shopkeeper's voice came from the door. "By the way, the money for wine and meat will be deducted from your monthly salary." The assassination of the envoy, which had been causing quite a stir in the past few days, passed by in such a light manner. Of course, understatement is only relative to the current situation, and subtle changes are of great significance to some people. The Imperial Academy ran out of sacrificial wine, and it took more than a dozen buckets of water to wash away the brown blood on the stone slabs at Keishikao. There was still a faint smell of blood in the air. The lives of the common people have not changed at all, and naturally no one will know that there is one less jailer in the prison. In a small dilapidated courtyard in the north district of the capital, a woman holding her child sheds tears. Prince Duan's mansion. Prince Duan was not unhappy because of the Tang family's affairs. He had just returned from visiting his mother and concubine in the palace. After hearing some words, he also had some thoughts in his heart that he had never had before. At this moment, he will be the emperor in the future, possessing absolute power in the world. He never wants anyone to restrain him, nor does he want the Tang family to return to its former strength. He is already the crown prince recognized by his father, and he no longer has to seize the throne, plot, or the Tang family. Thinking about it this way, he felt a little happy after the Tang family fell. From this incident, he also saw Tang Ning's terrifying strength in the court. There is no doubt that with his father's favor, he will grow into a more powerful official than Tang Huai before him. Thinking about it this way, the continued decline of the Tang family is not a good thing for him. His father used Tang Ning to contain the Tang family, and he needed to use the Tang family to contain Tang Ning. This was the imperial technique he learned from his father. Thinking of this, King Duan looked at a follower below and said, "Prepare some gifts. I am going to the Tang family." The Tang family suffered a big blow. In contrast, it should be King Duan's defeat. If it were before, people would naturally think of King Kong. However, when it came to seizing the air, King Kong had already been eliminated. Even if the Tang family was removed from the capital's elite, King Duan was still King Duan. He had long been an invisible prince, and there was no need to rely on the power of the Tang family. King Kong seems to have been forgotten and has not appeared in the conversations of the people for a long time. In Prince Kang's mansion, Prince Kong has also learned the outcome of the case. He stood under the eaves and asked with some regret, "Is that all?" Mr. Su stood behind him and said slowly, "This is the best ending. There is Prince Duan and concubine Hui behind the Tang family. Your Majesty will not be merciless at all." King Kong sighed and said, "Father is really partial, he has always been so partial." Mr. Su said, "Your Highness, please stop worrying about these things. The most important thing right now is to prepare for the ceremony that will take place in a few months." King Kong took a deep breath and said, "Sir, you are right. Regardless of Zhao Ming and the Tang family, no matter how important things are, they are not as important as the festival." He turned around and walked slowly into the palace. As he walked, he sighed, Marquis Dingguo, you have disappointed me so much. If you could use half of the strength you used to deal with me, by the way, we can also take Tang Huai's prince's young master. Tang family. In this incident, although the Tang family was in a dangerous situation, they were able to escape safely. The Quasijiju itself did not have any important real power, so if it was lost, it would be lost. King Duan came to express his condolences with a generous gift today. Before leaving, he looked at Tang Huai and Tang Qi and said, "It's just a prince offering wine. Uncle, don't worry about it. When this king comes to power, I will definitely bring the Tang family back to its former peak." After sending Prince Duan away, Tang Qi showed a hint of doubt and murmured, "Your Highness today seems to be a little different from before." Too calm and relaxed, Tang Huai said, "In the past, he has been furious, but this time it seems that it has nothing to do with him." "It's nothing to do with him." Tang Zhao looked at the two of them and said, "There is something wrong with the Tang family, and it won't harm cousin Duan Wang. There is no one left to compete with him for the throne, so why is he so angry?" As soon as Tang Zhao said this, the atmosphere in the room became somewhat silent. Tang Qi looked at him, gritted his teeth and said, "What did you say? You still don't understand." Tang Zhao looked at them and sighed, "The Tang family is the bridge that Duan Wang's cousin used to cross the river and the donkey that pushed the mill. Now that he has finished crossing the river and pushing the mill, whether the bridge is there or not, what does it matter to him whether the donkey dies or not?" "What the hell are you talking about?" Tang Qi said angrily, "for so many years, the Tang family has stood behind him and paid so much for him. Crossing the river and demolishing the bridge, unloading the mill and killing the donkey, killing the bird and hiding it, killing the rabbit and cooking the dog." Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, "Is there such a thing in the history books? We in the Tang family have done it countless times." He changed his tone and asked again, "Besides, do you think that when he becomes the emperor, do you really hope that the Tang family will become as powerful as before?" Tang Zhao said leisurely, "At this moment, at that moment, he must be thinking about how to control the court. He will not hope that a family can be as powerful as the Tang family in the past and control the government. So, don't look at Tang Ning's current situation. When cousin Duan Wang comes to power, his fate will not be any better than the current Tang family. Of course, by then, although the Tang family will not be able to return to its former glory, it will definitely be better than it is now. Much better, Don't worry about this. Tang Hui and Tang Qi looked gloomy, and Tang Zhao's words were like sharp knives, each sentence piercing their hearts. After a long time, Tang Zhao breathed a long sigh of relief and murmured, "However, there is one more strange thing." Tang Qi looked at him. At this point, he could no longer ignore the words of the son who had never been looked at by him. Tang Zhao looked at him and explained, "The case of the assassination of the envoy has been revealed for so long. It is a matter of personal concern. Why is there no movement at all from the Chu state? Could it be that the Chu state does not have an envoy in the capital?" Tang Qi's body trembled, and he looked at him and said with difficulty, "Yes. Rong Xiaorong says. As expected, it is not feasible to save and post together. After 2 days, I have saved up 1 chapter. I will post as much as I can in the future. I have nothing to do today, so I will write all day long and strive for 4 updates and 5 updates. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 758. 3 years ago, the assassination of the Chu envoy was finally attributed to the Tang family, but the focus was still diverted. The Tang family paid a steward and the position of the Imperial Academy to eliminate the matter. Just when everyone thought that the matter would end here, a letter from the Chu envoy pushed the case to a climax again and pushed the Tang family to the forefront. Chen and Chu were friendly countries. In addition to sending envoys to communicate every year, the 2 countries also had envoys stationed in each other's capital. 3 years ago, the Chu envoy was assassinated, and Chu was furious. In order to appease Chu, Chen ordered a thorough investigation of the case, but it ended up in nothing. Now the old case is brought up again, but Chen lightly let the culprit of the year go, which caused great dissatisfaction among the Chu envoys. A letter was directly handed to Emperor Chen, demanding that the people involved in the case be severely punished. Chu was the victim of this case, so it was naturally qualified to make such a request. However, the words "strictly handle" are very intriguing. If an ordinary person was involved in this serious case, he would be beheaded at the least, or his family would be confiscated and exterminated at the worst, so that he could give an explanation to the state of Chu. The Tang family has a special status, and it is impossible to behead and exterminate the family, but it is too disrespectful to the state of Chu to just symbolically dismiss Tang Qi from the Imperial College. It is related to the face of the country. Now it is just the envoy of the state of Chu submitting a memorial to the Emperor Chen. If the court does not handle this matter well, the next submission may be a letter from the state of Chu to the state of Chen. A letter from the envoy of the state of Chu shook the court, which had just calmed down not long ago. In the imperial study, the Emperor Chen was furious and threw the memorial to the ground, angrily saying, "Now they are looking for me to explain, what have they been doing? The matter of the Tang family has been concluded." The envoy of the state of Chu submitted a memorial at this time, demanding severe punishment for the Tang family. Isn't it asking him to overturn his order? The emperor is not joking. If the emperor's order can be overturned at will, where will the emperor's face be? But if it is not overturned, it will inevitably lead to the dissatisfaction of the state of Chu. The emperor's face is not worth mentioning compared with the interests of the country. Emperor Chen lowered his head to pick up the memorial, sighed, and said, "Those bastards of the Tang family only know how to make trouble for me. None of them with the surname Tang are good." Wei Jian stepped forward with a bitter smile on his face and said, "Your Majesty, the envoy of the state of Chu has come forward. We must take this matter seriously, otherwise, I am afraid that something big will happen. Now that the threat of the grassland has temporarily disappeared, the state of Chen has lost a powerful enemy, but the state of Chu has benefited more from this matter. The enemy has gone, and the state of Chu can develop better. At this time, it is obviously not a wise choice to make enemies with the state of Chu because of something that is not reasonable. Of course I know." Emperor Chen waved his hand and said, "Summon the Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice, the Imperial Censor to the palace, in addition, let that bastard come here too. Tang family. The Chu envoy came forward and asked the court to severely punish the Tang family. Tang Zhao hit the nail on the head, and the atmosphere in the Tang family was solemn. The severity of this incident is completely different from before. The last time the Ministry of Justice found that the Tang family was related to the assassination of the envoy, the Tang family insisted that it was a misunderstanding, so it would not hurt the bones. But this time is different. When it involves countries, small things can become big things. The Chu envoy is holding on to this case. It doesn't matter whether the Tang family is guilty or not, and how serious their crime is. The important thing is how to appease the envoy and satisfy the Chu state, which is what the court needs to consider. As for whether the Tang family will sacrifice, no one cares. The Tang family waited anxiously for the result. The food was already on the table, but no one started eating. Tang Zhao looked around, sighed, picked up the chopsticks, and said as he ate the rice in big mouthfuls, "Eat, anyway, the Tang family has nothing left, and my uncle's prince's tutor is just a decoration. Apart from this house, the Tang family has nothing important to lose. Just wait for the result. It's better to wait with a full stomach than to wait with hunger." Another courtyard of the Tang family. Since the incident 20 years ago, Tang Jing no longer cares about the family affairs. He doesn't eat with everyone on weekdays. He just guards this courtyard. Except for going to and from the yamen every day, even the servants of the Tang family rarely see him. He and a woman sat at the table. There was a simple meal on the table. The woman ate a few bites, put down her chopsticks, and asked, "What will happen to the Tang family this time?" "I don't know." Tang Jing shook his head and said, "Your Majesty has just summoned the Prime Minister and several ministers to discuss matters. There should be a result soon." The woman looked at him and continued to ask, "Will it affect you?" "I don't know," Tang Jing said, "we still have to wait for news from the palace." "If we had known this, why did we do it in the first place?" The woman sighed and said, "We should have persuaded them more back then." Tang Jing shook his head and said, "They only have the family's face in their eyes and won't listen to persuasion." The woman looked sad and said, "So now they have not only lost all their face, but also everything they care about. Let's eat." Tang Jing's eyes showed a trace of regret. He didn't want to mention this matter again. He picked up the chopsticks and said, "If we don't eat, it will get cold." The Chu envoy rolled up the dust that had already settled. The Tang family just got out of the quagmire and fell into the whirlpool again. Everyone was waiting for the result in the palace. At this time, Tang Ning received a summons from Emperor Chen. When he was about to leave, Zhou Mingli chased him out and warned him, "This matter was caused by you. When you face His Majesty later, be careful when you speak." Tang Ning nodded, indicating that he understood. It was in his plan that the Tang family's case would become so big. As for Emperor Chen, he was not worried about it. If Emperor Chen cared about the Tang family, he would have protected the Tang family many times when he was in the 6 ministries, and would not have waited until now. He entered the palace under the guidance of an eunuch and came to the outside of the imperial study. Wei Jian stood at the door and smiled. "His Majesty is discussing matters with several adults." "Lord Tang, please wait a moment." Wei Jian was Emperor Chen's close friend. Before meeting Emperor Chen, Tang Ning planned to get some information from him first. He took out an apple from his sleeve, which Ching'er had stuffed into his pocket when he left. He handed it to Wei Jian and said, "General Manager Wei, have an apple." Wei Jian did not refuse. After taking it, he broke it in half and handed the other half to Tang Ning, saying with a smile, "We will each have half." Tang Ning took a bite of the apple and asked, "What's going on inside?" Wei Jian shook his head and said, "I don't know about that." "Your Majesty is very angry," Tang Ning asked in a different way. Wei Jian smiled slightly and said, the matter has become so serious that even the envoys of Chu state have been involved. Your Majesty is very angry, but your Majesty also said that young people should rely on the breath in their chests. This breath cannot be held back. It is human nature to let it out from time to time. As expected, people who eat people's food are soft-hearted and people who take people's money are short-handed. With Wei Jian's words, Tang Ning felt relieved. He bowed to Wei Jian and said, "Thank you, Steward Wei." Wei Jian took a bite of the apple and smiled, "I didn't say anything." Tang Ning waited outside the palace for a quarter of an hour, and Wang Xiang and others came out of the palace. When they saw him, they all looked surprised. Before Tang Ning had time to ask, a eunuch came out and said, "Sir Tang, His Majesty summoned you." Tang Ning walked into the imperial study, and Emperor Chen looked down at him and said angrily, "Look at what you have done." Mobile reading URL. /U0026 hashtag 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 /U0026 hashtag. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 759. Emperor Chen looked angry. Tang Ning bowed and said, "I am guilty." "Don't do this to me." Huang Chen waved his hand and said, "If you know you are guilty, don't commit it. Do you know how much trouble you have caused me?" Tang Ning said, "I am ashamed of your Majesty." Chen Huang said angrily, "For a small case, even the envoys of Chu state came forward." Tang Ning did not lower her head to admit her mistake this time and said, "Your Majesty, I don't think this is a small case." Emperor Chen smiled instead of getting angry and said, "Oh, tell me, what's the big deal about this case?" Tang Ning cleared her throat and said, "In His Majesty's eyes, this may be just a small case, but 3 years ago, I almost lost my life because of this case." Before Chen Huang could speak, Tang Ning continued, "If I had lost my life 3 years ago, it would have been impossible for me to pass the 3 elements. If I could not pass the 3 elements, I would not be able to walk in the 6 divisions. If I could not walk in the 6 divisions, the mobs in the 6 divisions would not be able to. If it is eliminated, the government will be full of corrupt officials, the national treasury will be in deficit, and even the hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for water control will not be available. In addition, if I had been assassinated 3 years ago, I would naturally not be able to go south to the south of the Yangtze River or north to the grassland. Jiangnan would be controlled by the wealthy families and usurped by the remaining parties of the Liang Kingdom, and the grassland would not be stable. When the time comes, Jiangnan will be in chaos, and Sushen will people from the western regions took advantage of the opportunity to invade, but the court was full of moths. The Chen state was riddled with holes internally, and powerful enemies were watching from the outside. The country was in danger. Chen Huang looked at him dumbfounded. He always felt that something was not right. He subconsciously wanted to refute, but he didn't know where to start. After thinking about it carefully, he seemed unable to refute it at all. Throughout the past few years, Tang Ning was not involved in any of the major events that occurred in Chen State, and there was no major event in which he did not play a key or even decisive role. Just imagine, if he had really died under the assassination of the Tang family 3 years ago, the Chen state might really be in turmoil now. Not to mention anything else, let's just say that he traveled to the south of the Yangtze River and went to the grassland. Internally, he cleared away countless moths for the court and purged the court, which resulted in the treasury having an extra 100 million taels of silver out of thin air. Externally, he suppressed rebellions. In the south of the Yangtze River, the grasslands were stabilized and the crisis of the country was resolved. No one else would be able to do this. Cough, cough. Chen Huang coughed a few times to cover up his embarrassment and said, "The Tang family is your kin after all, so why do you need to kill them all?" Tang Ning smiled mockingly and said, "They have assassinated me over and over again, but have they ever regarded me as a relative?" Emperor Chen looked at him, sighed, and said, "The Tang family is the mother clan of Prince Duan and the natal family of concubine Hui. It is impossible for me to exterminate them. I have removed Prince Tang Hui from his official post, taken away his title, demoted him to a commoner, and raided the Tang family's old residence. Are you satisfied with this result?" Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "The Tang family has violated the law and should be punished. Your Majesty will just handle it in accordance with the national law." "I will abide by the national law." Chen Huang glared at him and said, "You got a lot of advantage and acted like a good boy. If I hadn't looked at your face this time, I would have suppressed the punishment department's discount." Tang Ning smiled sheepishly, bowed and said, "I thank your Majesty. It's good to know that I'm protecting you." Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "Stop cheating in the future, and do a good job for me." Tang Ning let out a long sigh of relief when she walked out of the imperial study room. Taking into account the feelings of the Chu state, Chen Huang was already at the limit of what he expected and what Chen Huang could do. After today, although there are many people with the Tang surname in the capital, there is only one from the Tang family. The Tang family, whose ancestral home was confiscated and returned to the state treasury, can no longer be called the Tang family. The Tang family, which was once glorious for a while, has completely become history. The price Tang Ning paid for this was that Chen Huang took away his 2-month vacation and asked him to go to Shaanxi province tomorrow to deal with the issue. Tang Ning sighed. He had already planned how to spend the past 2 months. He had only been back from the grassland for a long time. Emperor Chen was like Zhao Poppy. After Tang Ning left, Wei Jian slowly walked back to the imperial study. Chen Huang glanced at him and asked, "What did you eat secretly?" Wei Jian wiped his mouth and said, "Master Tang gave half an apple to the old slave just now." Chen Huang said casually, "When did you become so familiar with him?" Wei Jian smiled and said, "I'm not very familiar with him either. Mr. Tang is kind to others and doesn't look down on us slaves. Come on." Chen Huang waved his hand and said, "He is kind, that's because he can be mean when he smiles. In recent years, grass has begun to grow on the graves of people who think like you." When the Chu envoys came forward, the court's efficiency was indeed different. In less than a day, the penalty for the Tang family had been handed down. The Tang family was unfavorable to the friendly envoys, and the head of the family, Tang Hui, could not escape the blame. He was now demoted to a commoner and stripped of his official position. At the same time, the Tang family's property was confiscated as punishment. Everyone was not surprised that the emperor punished the Tang family in this way, because if the matter was revealed in a light manner this time, it would be difficult for the Chu envoys to explain it. Compared with Chu state, the Tang family was nothing. In the past few years, the Tang family has been in decline, and until now, it can no longer even be called the Tang family. Inside the old residence of the Tang family, Tang Hui, who had already received his crown and court uniform, knelt on the ground, kowtowed in the direction of the eunuch who announced the decree, and said in a calm voice, "My lord, thank you for your kindness. The eunuch who delivered the decree heard a hint of trembling in his calm voice, glanced at him sadly, handed him the imperial edict, and turned around to leave. All the maids and servants of the Tang family knelt on the ground tremblingly, not daring to get up. The Tang family finally waited for this result. The turmoil in the court was turbulent. The Tang family was not dead, but the home was in ruins. In 3 days, everyone in the Tang family will move out. By then, it is still unknown where the owner will go, let alone these servants. Tang Hui stood up slowly and staggered. Tang Chi hurriedly supported him and said, "If you keep the green hills, you won't be afraid of running out of firewood." Tang Hui refused Tang Chi's support, waved his hands to his servants, and said in a hoarse voice, "Let's all disperse." The Tang family, which was once extremely glorious and at its peak, had all its servants dispersed overnight, and the Tang family's old house was sealed by the court. The imperial court only demoted Tang Hui to a commoner and took over the Tang family's house without touching their property. After moving out of the old house, the Tang family purchased another house in the west district of the capital. The scale was naturally not comparable to that of the old house, but it was still a place to settle down. In this turmoil, Tang Hui and Tang Chi were the most affected. Both of them lost their official positions. Tang Jing was not implicated. He was still employed as his servant, but he had to move out of his old house and find another place. Tang Jing did not live with his 2 brothers. Instead, he bought a courtyard with one entrance 2 streets away. The courtyard was not big enough for the couple to live in, but it was enough. The more glorious the Tang family was in the past, the more pitiful it is compared to its current situation. The capital is like a deep pool full of whirlpools, with turbulent undercurrents and rocks everywhere. No matter how big the ship is, there is a risk of capsizing if you are not careful. The great ship from which Queen Duan's mother clan, Tang Huifei, came, had obviously fallen apart and ceased to exist. From now on, when it comes to the Tang family in the capital, there will no longer be any disagreements. Because after today, there will only be one Tang family in the capital. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 760. Capital, West District. There are 4 areas in the capital. The palace is in the east, the dignitaries in the capital occupy the southeast, the north area is mostly occupied by ordinary people, and the west area is full of shops, where wealthy businessmen gather. The Tang family's old house was confiscated, and the head of the family was dismissed from his position and demoted to a commoner. Naturally, he had no shame to live in the southeast anymore, but he didn't want to live in the most chaotic north district, so he bought a house in the west. The Tang family has been traumatized many times in the past few years, but they still have some foundation. The ancestral home was confiscated, but the family property is still there, enough to buy a new house. The merchants in the North District are a little bit new to the existence of the Tang family. The family that was once so high and mighty has now been reduced to the same land as them. It has to be said that they feel quite comfortable in their hearts. Since the Tang family moved here, the door has been tightly closed, which dissuaded some people who wanted to watch the fun. The strange thing is that after the Tang family moved in, several new shops around the Tang family apparently also changed their owners, and the Tang Grenzai sign was hung up the next day. Everyone knows whose property Tang Grenzai belongs to. After dragging the Tang family from the clouds to the dust, and now using this method to discuss them, the feud between Marquis Dingguo and the Tang family is really as deep as the sea. Within the closed door of the Tang family, Tang Hui stood in the courtyard with an expressionless face. Even though the Tang family has declined to this day, the remaining pride of the Tang family does not allow him to walk out of this courtyard and accept the baptism of everyone's eyes. Tang Zhao held a book in his hand, walked to the yard, looked at him, sighed, and said, "If uncle feels bored, just read more books." During the few months when my father put me in confinement, I came here like this, but I didn't realize before that reading is so interesting, and the outside world is actually in the book. Tang Ning had no vacation and could only go to and from the office on time every day. He sat in Shaanxi province for a day and helped Wang Xiang read the documents for a day. By the time he went to the yamen, he was already a little dizzy. After leaving the palace and walking to the street, I felt better after blowing in the cold wind. He passed by a carriage and suddenly heard a voice in his ears. "Are you satisfied now?" When Tang Ning heard this voice, she paused in her steps, a smile appeared on her face, and said, "To say she is satisfied, it's not quite satisfactory." "Are you satisfied with seeing the Tang family destroyed?" The voice in the carriage was a little strange, and it was obvious that he said it through gritted teeth. Tang Ning smiled and said, "This is your own fault. Don't blame me." Tang Chi was silent for a while and asked, "Do you think you are clean? Where did you hide the fifth sister?" Tang Ning smiled and said, "Did you think I would tell you?" Tang Chi said gloomily, "It is indeed you." Tang Ning did not deny it and said, "It's me, what can you do to me?" Tang Chi took a deep breath, calmed down, and said, "How long do you think you can be proud of? At least you should be proud of it until King Duan takes the throne, right?" Tang Ning glanced at the carriage and whispered, "That is also if King Duan can take the throne." Tang Chi in the car was obviously stunned for a moment, and then his voice was sharp and trembling, "What do you mean?" "It's nothing." Tang Ning smiled and said, "I just think that Prince Huai seems to be more suitable to be emperor than Prince Duan. Even Prince Kong is better than Prince Duan. If I take sides, I will definitely side with them." After he said this, he left without looking at the carriage again. In the carriage, Tang Chi looked pale, with only one sentence echoing in his mind. "He wants to participate in the seizure of the legitimate son, he wants to participate in the seizure of the legitimate son." With his power and connections in Beijing, it would be okay not to take sides. Once he chooses to stand on the opposite side of King Duan's already secure throne will face great turmoil. Tang Chi was frightened and urged the driver, "Go to Prince Duan's mansion." Tang Ning returned home, took a comfortable hot bath, and forgot about her encounter with Tang Chi. What he said just now was just to scare him. How could he assist King Kong and King Huai? King Kong lost his position as prince because of him. He must have regarded himself as a thorn in his side now. How could they reconcile? As for the King Huai, does that salted fish need help? And from now on, even if he does nothing now, the forces behind Zhao Yuan will be able to force Chen Huang to become the supreme emperor by forcing him into the palace when his health is declining. Seizing a direct descendant is like sailing against the current. If you don't advance, you will retreat. King Duan thought that he would win if he didn't do well, but in fact Zhao Yuan was already growing up and catching up. In Prince Duan's mansion. After hearing about the conversation between Tang Chi and Tang Ning just now, Duan Wang spit out a sip of tea and said in horror, "What?" Tang Chi clenched his fists and said, "He may be participating in the fight for the legitimate son, but I don't know that he is supporting King Kong and King Huai. How could this happen?" A look of fear appeared on Prince Duan's face. After seeing Tang Ning's various methods, he was really scared. The power of the Tang family was overwhelming. He had brought such a large family to its present end within 3 years. His father was in good health and could reign for at least another 3 years. Considering how much my father valued that man, let alone the prince, even if he was the prince, he might pull him down from his position. He looked at Tang Chi and said solemnly, "Is this true?" Tang Chi said, "Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of the worst. Although King Kong is already the heir, it is not impossible for the heir to restore the throne. If he decides to help King Huai, the matter will be more serious." "Is it Prince Kong or Prince Huai?" Prince Duan's face showed a gloomy look, and he gritted his teeth and said, Call the counselors of the palace. Prince Kang's palace. Prince Kang walked out of the palace and couldn't help laughing. What a pity, I didn't see Tang Huai's expression at that time. After fighting with the Tang family for so long, he had suffered countless losses at the hands of the Tang family. The former powerful enemy has now been wiped out. This is the most refreshing thing he has heard recently. He said something to himself. After a long time, he didn't hear anyone talking to him. He turned around and found that Mr. Su had a strange expression on his face. He asked in surprise, "Mr. Su, what's wrong?" Mr. Su looked around the outside of the palace for a week before slowly retracting his gaze and whispering, "Someone is watching the palace." Kang Wang's face suddenly darkened and he asked, "Who?" Mr. Su looked at the stone lion at the entrance of the palace and said, "The third tea house on the left, the fourth window on the second floor." Kang Wang was about to look up when Mr. Su reminded him, "Your Highness, don't look over there." On the tea house near Kang Wang's palace, a man sat in front of the window on the second floor, looking in the direction of Kang Wang's palace from time to time. When he saw Kang Wang come out and stand at the entrance of the palace for a while, he walked in again. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. He slowly stood up and moved a distance to the window. After an incense stick, there was still no movement in the palace, but more than a dozen figures suddenly surged up from the first floor and ran straight to the window. His face changed, and he jumped out of the window without hesitation. He didn't run a few steps before he was pinned to the ground and couldn't move. A quarter of an hour later, in the palace of Prince Kang, Mr. Su walked into a hall, looked at Prince Kang, and said, "I've asked clearly, it's Prince Duan's people." A trace of anger appeared on the face of Prince Kang, and he gritted his teeth and said, "What on earth does Zhao Ming want to do?" At the same time, in the Prince Huai's palace, when Prince Huai and Princess Huai walked out of the palace, their steps suddenly stopped. Princess Huai, who was holding his hand, raised her head and asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" Prince Huai looked forward, but his peripheral vision was a merchant carrying a load under a tree not far away. His brows were slightly wrinkled, and it took a moment for him to relax again. He looked down at Princess Huai, smiled slightly, and said, "Nothing, let's go." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 761. Tang Ning has been reviewing countless memorials in the Shangshu province these days. Although he seems to be living a fulfilling life, he feels empty inside. In 3 years, the Tang family has fallen from the clouds to the dust, and there is no chance for them to make a comeback. The murderer on that day has been beheaded. Tang Huai and Tang Qi have gone from being high-ranking officials to ordinary civilians, ashamed to show up in front of the public. For a family that once dominated the court, they paid a painful and almost unacceptable price. He felt a little relieved after his revenge, but it was also very limited. In his opinion today, even the Tang family in its heyday was no more than that. Kick the already declining Tang family out of the circle of the rich and powerful, and it would not gain much sense of existence. Hatred has always occupied only a small corner in his heart. Tang Shui said something very right, people cannot always live in hatred. In Tang Ning's opinion, there are many things in this world that are far more important than hatred. Thinking of Tang Shui, Tang Ning felt a little lucky. Fortunately, when he returned to Beijing this time, she had taken her mother to Jiangnan to relax. When they came back, the affairs of the Tang family had already been settled. They were born and raised in the Tang family. Unlike Tang Ning, they had more or less an inseparable feeling for their former family. It was a day off today, and Tang Ning did not go anywhere, but just stayed at home. Fang Xinyu came to see Xiao Xiao again today. I don't know where the old beggar took her to experience this time, but she hasn't come back yet. Without the two of them chattering in her ears, Tang Ning felt that the house was much quieter. The court was not quiet at all. One wave had not settled, and another wave rose. These days, Prince Duan, who rarely showed up, didn't know what was wrong with him, and he walked in front of people again. In fact, everyone has almost tacitly agreed that Prince Duan is the prince selected by His Majesty. Therefore, some officials in the court have been deliberately close to Prince Duan since Prince Kong was deposed. In a short period of time, many officials and dignitaries have gathered around him. It is precisely because of this that even without the Tang family, Prince Duan's power in the court has been as stable as Mount Tai. In the past few days, Prince Duan, who didn't know what was wrong, and his vassals suddenly broke the norm and began to attack Prince Kong and Prince Huai for various inexplicable reasons, which puzzled many people including Tang Ning. Prince Kong has been excluded from the imperial power. Although Prince Huai often acts in the court, judging from the attitude of Emperor Chen towards him, he did not list Prince Huai as a candidate for the prince at all. Prince Huai could not pose a threat to Prince Duan at all. In this situation, Prince Duan suddenly went crazy, like a mad dog, barking at Prince Kong and Prince Huai, biting whoever he caught. This was the most intense time between him and Prince Kong. Regarding this matter, officials in the court generally believed that Prince Duan might want to kill all the princes in the capital to feel at ease. With his cruelty, the royal family might have to repeat the mistakes of more than 20 years ago. It was miserable enough for Prince Kong to go from a prince to a successor prince. He had to face so many impeachments every day. He was obviously tired of dealing with it and looked haggard. As for Prince Huai, he had not come to court for several days. He neither refuted nor responded to Prince Duan's impeachment attacks. He was strong and arrogant, and he remained unchanged in the face of changes. But Prince Huai had to come to the morning court today. Because what was to be discussed today was the position of the Imperial College Jeju. The rank of the Imperial College Jeju was not low. Although the actual power was limited to the small piece of land of the Imperial College, the people in the Imperial College were the future flowers of the state of Chen, the mainstay of the court, and the position of the Imperial College Jeju was not something that anyone could sit on. The Imperial College was originally under the jurisdiction of Prince Duan. In a political struggle a few years ago, Prince Kong won it. Although Tang Qi was transferred there later, he was suppressed by Prince Duan everywhere. The control of the Imperial College was still in the hands of Prince Kong. Later, Prince Kong fell and Prince Huai took over the Imperial College. Not long after, Tang Qi was transferred again. The new Imperial College Jeju had not yet been determined. All the affairs of the Imperial College were handled by Prince Huai. Naturally, he could not be absent from such a major event. At the morning court today, Prince Duan still launched a fierce attack on Prince Kong and Prince Huai. Some of them were nitpicking, and some were fabricated and fictitious. In the end, even Emperor Chen couldn't help it and told him to shut up and stay aside. The position of the Imperial College Jeju was over at the end of the morning court, and the officials did not discuss the result. The reason is that since Tang Ning walked in the 6 ministries, the transfer of senior officials in the court of Chen State has become a common thing. When a large number of senior officials fall, there will be corresponding officials promoted. The Imperial College Jeju is a third-rank official position, and is eligible for this position. Before this, at least a fourth-rank official seal is required. Now, senior officials have their own duties, and the practice of robbing Peter to pay Paul is no longer allowed. Compared with the affairs of the Imperial College, the duties of those senior officials are obviously more important. So Emperor Chen simply put the matter aside, and the affairs of the Imperial College were handed over to King Huai to manage. When leaving the court, Tang Ning happened to walk out of the hall with King Huai. King Huai tilted his head and glanced at him, smiling. "I haven't congratulated Lord Tang on his promotion yet." Tang Ning said politely, "It's all your Majesty's love." Among the 3 princes, although he and King Huai have no friendship, they are not like King Kong and King Duan who are incompatible. Perhaps because the two have something in common, he has never had any bad feelings towards King Huai. For example, both of them are lazy, both of them spoil their wives, and both of them have been married for several years without children. Of course, Tang Ning has no children because the Tang family may have a big change in the next 2 years, and he does not plan to have one for the time being. Prince Huai has been married for so long, and the couple loves each other, but they still have no children. It may be purely because of physical problems. In any case, men who spoil their wives are generally not bad, which is probably an important reason why Tang Ning can never hate him. Although my father does love Lord Tang very much, this is what Lord Tang deserves. Prince Huai smiled and walked out of the palace with Tang Ning, but did not say anything more. At the gate of the palace, Prince Duan looked gloomy. Looking at Prince Huai, who was talking and laughing with Tang Ning, he gritted his teeth and said, "It turned out to be you." For some reason, Prince Duan was like a mad dog a few days ago, grabbing Prince Kong and Prince Huai and biting them fiercely. In the past 2 days, he let Prince Kong go and increased his firepower on Prince Huai. Emperor Chen has given Prince Huai many tasks in the past 2 years. Prince Huai is in charge of some less important departments in the court. Prince Duan cannot do anything to Prince Huai, so he points the finger at the officials under his various departments, causing many people in the court to avoid him like the plague in recent days. In the ministry of Shangshu, there have been countless impeachment memorials handed over from Prince Duan's subordinates in recent days. Tang Ning saw them and threw them aside. The Right Chancellor of the Shangshu came over with a pile of memorials, and finally couldn't help complaining, "Is His Highness Prince Duan crazy these days? Did Prince Huai offend him again?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "Who knows? In the eyes of everyone, Prince Duan is no different from a mad dog now. Who can understand the mind of a mad dog? Maybe he just said a few more words to him after Prince Huai left the court that day. This is not impossible.